Hello, welcome to Stageworthy. I'm Phil Rickaby, the host and producer of this podcast. Stageworthy is Canada's theatre podcast, and on Stageworthy, I talk to theatre makers of all kinds, from actors to directors to playwrights to stage managers. If they make theatre in Canada, I'm talking to them. Some of the people I talk to are household names, and the rest are people that I really think you should get to know. Jumping straight in, my guest this week is Kathleen Welch. Kathleen is a playwright, composer, director, and actor, and one of the founding members of the Spindle Collective. Kathleen is one of the creators of Spindle Collective's hit show, Samka. And Kathleen joined me to talk about their latest show, Siofra. Now, Siofra is the Spindle Collective's latest horror offering. And you can see Siofra at the Red Sandcastle Theatre from June 17th to 28th in Toronto. Now, here's my conversation with Kathleen Welch. Kathleen Welch, thank you so much for joining me on Stageworthy. It is such a pleasure to have you on the program. There is so much to talk about today, and there's a lot of things that I'm really excited to talk to you about, because I love the aesthetic of the Spindle Collective. I love the kind of theater that you guys are creating, the stories. We're here mostly to talk about the new show Siofra, which will be coming up very shortly. So why don't we start out by talking about that show? What is that about?
So Siofra is sort of it's the second in a trilogy that me and Natalia Bushnik, who run Spindle Collective, that we've written. So this one, Siofra, is set in sort of 1860s Ireland, the west of Ireland, and it's kind of a little bit spooky, unsettling story that deals with the myth of Irish changeling babies. So yeah, changelings being these fairy children that, in myth at least, were your child would be stolen away and replaced with a fairy child. And so that's sort of the mythology that we have sort of based our story around. It's an original story, but just using that as inspiration. And yeah, like I said, it's the second in a trilogy. Our first one, Samka, was set in Romania, and it had to do with Romanian folklore. This one's set in Ireland. The third one in our trilogy, Spindle, is set in Germany. So it's just sort of exploring folklore and mythology and kind of demonic creatures and things like that.
The whole changeling stories, I mean, fairy stories in the first place, are a rich tapestry to play with. Because once you get away from the happy Tinkerbell type fairy, you get into some really deliciously dark stuff. What was it about the changeling stories, the changeling mythology that drew you to this subject?
Yeah. So initially, Natalia had sort of an idea about doing a story based on changelings, and part of it was based in real history. There's this story about, it's actually set later than our play. It's like right around 1900, of this woman who they thought was a fairy changeling and got sort of murdered by the people in her town in rural Ireland. And it kind of was the inspiration, playing with mob mentality and the idea of how mythology sort of plays out in reality, of what people perceive of it. So in our play, the ideas are explored without necessarily being confirming one way or another of what's true, because these myths exist for a reason, from real things that were sort of happening. And with changeling children, often it's like a child who gets ill or is acting different than what they were previously, and so they want a way to explain that. So yeah, Nat sort of had the idea initially, and then we had been working on Samka for a very long time together, and then she kind of invited me in, of being like, maybe we could tie these together, and we got really excited about sort of the exploration of motherhood and just how that connects to folklore and different stages of being a child / having a child. Yeah, it kind of stemmed from that.
I mean, there's a whole the idea that the whole idea of the changeling child is terrifying for the parent. Like
Well,
the idea that your child has been stolen away and this strange child has been left in its place. I mean, of course, if we were to go, what is the more likely reason for these children? Probably they
yeah,
had autism and things like that that were not understood at the time, but they're very real terrors that parents
yeah.
had. And so it is, like I said, like we said earlier, it's a very rich tapestry. You've mentioned you work with Natalia, and Samka was it the first show that you did together?
Yes, we worked together for years, and I wrote music for another show of hers previously, but that was the first play that we fully wrote and created together.
So what is the founding story of the Spindle Collective?
Well, Nat and I were friends for years. We were roommates in university, and we'd always sort of worked together and things, but Spindle Collective kind of came about in COVID, like many things, where you have time on your hands and things that you were us being more actors first, being unable to act, finding other avenues. And we had, like, both of us had written stuff before as well, but now we sort of had the time and space to think about what we really were interested in. And both of us love horror and folklore and how that combines, sort of like non-traditional horror, where it comes from mythology and it's unsettling without necessarily being jump scares or anyways, it was stuff we were both fascinated with. And then in COVID, we kind of had the time and wanted to create something because we were feeling a little stifled having not been able to do shows. We were people who were in shows all the time and then we didn't have them. And so we were writing like back and forth on Google Drive, like just sending scenes. And then we were so on the same page that it was a really nice, easy feeling. And I think both of us felt, I know we both talked about this, where both of us have written things on our own, but it's so much easier to write with a partner, especially we're on the same page so much of the time, but it's like one person's stuck, you read the other person's stuff, and now you have another way of jumping off where I'm much more likely to get stuck if I'm just doing it myself. I get in my own head a bit more. It's also really nice having positive feedback all the time. You have your writing partner and you might look down on your own stuff, but you love their things. And then they're like, hey, I love this. And you're like, no, I shouldn't get rid of everything I've written because it is good, because this person likes it, who I trust and I believe has taste. So it's been, everything we've written together has been a really nice process of excitement and jumping off of each other.
There is certainly a great benefit to having another voice that's not your own. The
Well,
number of times that I've written something and then been like, do I have to just throw everything out and start over?
yes. And sometimes you just need a friend being like, no.
I mean, it's so important because I believe that in every process, there is at least one point where you as the creator are like, well, this is all garbage. It has to go. Even if last
Yeah.
week you thought, no, this is good. This is okay. It just is part
Yeah,
of the process.
definitely.
I want to ask you a little bit about Spilleholt, which premiered at the first Dead of Winter Festival last winter. And the reason why I want to bring that up is that play deals with one of my favorite characters from the Yule-like folklore, which is Perchta. How did you first become interested in that particular character?
Yeah. So I was kind of, when we did Samka and then Siofra and they were combined, we were sort of thinking we'd want a third one sort of in a different place. So I was just looking into Germanic just because we deal with folklore and obviously the Germanic fairy tales and folklore is kind of the big one. And there's so much there from different regions. And so I was doing a little bit of research and I really love the idea of the Christmas witch idea is very interesting and also really neat for interpretations of her being positive at different points in the mythology as this positive figure that then descends post-Christianity into a demonic kind of figure because that was the only way they could deal with her. And so I think we were really interested in all the different versions of her. If you look up Perchta, or there's Frau Hulda, Bilahul is another. There's all these different names for different regions, as well as just different iterations of the same person who is a little more positive in one, a little more of a positive spiritual figure that is just promoting kids being productive, and ones that are like, this is the demonic witch who, carves open their stomach and fills it with straw and stones if they haven't finished their spinning. So we really liked the multitudes that this sort of character contained, and we could pull little bits from all different mythologies.
That is the freedom that we have in the modern era, is we can look at the pieces of the character and put them together. I always enjoyed the idea of how many of I refer to them as the Yule monsters, the Yule creatures around those areas. Their function around that time of year seems to be to teach people how to survive the long night, how to survive the winter. Perchta had a particular meal that you were supposed to eat at her feast, and if you didn't, that was one of the consequences. That one of the things that could lead to her disemboweling a member of the household. And I love how these things, which are frightening, are also designed to teach a valuable lesson about living in a cold climate.
Yeah. No, and I think, something I really like about, and this has been true for all three of the shows, is folklore versus like a straight up fairy tale that might have like a beginning, middle, and end. These folklore stories really lend themselves to original stories because they don't have a beginning, middle, and end. They're characters, but they exist not in one story. They exist just as something to draw inspiration from. So like when we initially did Samka is this figure, but she has no stories. Like there's no story associated with her. It's just, this is what she is. And so it's been really nice to pull out of these folkloric monsters and creatures our own original stories that seem to be, we're inspired by our little research we get to do, and we can throw in all these little things, but it's not, they get to be their own original story and almost create for us a background or a fully fledged story for these characters that exist on their own.
Yeah, there is definitely something about the characters in those regions which are just there. Even if you go over to Iceland, you've got the Yule lads, the Yule cat, Grilla, the ogre, and they're just there for parents and other people to use as tools and in stories, rather than like, well, they did this and they did this, and they did this. It's just like under the surface, and that is something that makes storytelling with those characters really kind of fun and exciting. You mentioned, Samka was the first play that you guys wrote together and the first in this now trilogy. And when you wrote that, the idea of this being a trilogy had not yet entered your mind.
No.
That's a relatively recent idea.
Yeah. It was kind of once we started working on Siofra together, and we were like all these things sort of tying between them, and we got excited about the progression. They're not sequels per se. They're individual stories that are quite different from each other, with some underlying similarities in theme a little bit, but in subject matter. And I think those ways the fact that folklore in so many different cultures, you find all these similarities where they didn't have any contact with each other, but people make their own folklore and they are drawn towards the same things. So I think once we were sort of partially working on Siofra, it kind of it made the trilogy come together. And then Spindle was written first as a 10-minute play, specifically for this 10-minute play contest that we did. It's actually where it first premiered, was in Brantford this past fall. And we wrote it just being like, oh, well, we want to apply to this 10-minute play contest. Maybe we'll play with this. And it was so easy to write a little 10-minute play. And we were so excited by it that once we did it there, we wanted to do it for Dead of Winter, and that was the plan. And then just this past month, we developed it and created it into a full-length show that we're planning on doing at some point. But yes, it happened organically that it turned into this trilogy, which I feel like has happened in a lot of different things in our writing where like we don't know where it's going to end. And then once it comes together, we're like, were we hinting at this the whole time? Because it just happened in that way.
Is there anything in you that says we can actually go back and like strengthen those thematic ties? We could go back to Samka and massage that a little and like make sure the through line is more clear.
Yeah, maybe. I think like Samka and Siofra is also, they're big cast shows, which is not necessarily well thought out for indie theater. They were not written with that in mind. We were writing what we wanted, and then we were like, what are we thinking? Having these 10 and 9-person cast shows. So Samka already, we've had a couple of iterations of it where like we got into a festival thing that was traveling. So we were like, how can we alter this show for 3 and make it a different thing? So I think we're always open to changing it. And that's what's kind of nice about producing and making your own plays, because we can just edit as we see fit. If we're like, we get into this festival, we're going to make it work in this length of show or this many people. And yeah, we might go back and just go, oh, how can we tie these together in a more organic way? Because they were written at different times in our life that maybe if we ever do, which would be a dream of mine to do a like outdoor all day thing where you do like all 3 of them in a row, but that's the kind of thing I love to do. I don't know if that could ever happen, but maybe there would be more little tie-ins that we'd find, because we want them to be individual shows. We don't want it's not a sequel. It's not a thing where you need to know anything about the previous shows to watch their individual stories with new characters in a new place. But it would be nice to see sort of when all 3 of them are kind of fully done, how does that progress? How does it work?
So it's more of a cycle than a trilogy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trilogy's probably the wrong word, but we're figuring things out. We haven't produced the whole thing.
I mean,
yet.
who does a cycle in these days? And also, like you're talking about, they're large cast shows which really get done, but quite frankly, someone's got to.
Yeah.
We've got to do those things.
Yeah.
We got to get back to big cast shows and wherever possible, get back to our epic stories that we can tell with like.
I love a big epic story. I also love a big, not that none of our plays are really, really long or anything, but the whole idea of being able to see like all 3 in a row is just up my alley. I'm like I love a long mini series, something you can spend your whole day doing or watching.
It's binge theater.
Exactly.
Like we could binge some theater, which is awesome. Now you mentioned a little bit ago when it's kind of a couple of times the Dead of Winter Festival. So we should talk about that. What is the Dead of Winter Festival?
Yeah. So we just started it this year. We're very excited about it. It's sort of a partnership Spindle Collective has with Eldritch Theatre, which we're also doing Siofra at Red Sandcastle as sort of a guest member of Eldritch's season, which you know all about, I believe. And yeah, so we had sort of talked to Eric a bit. Both me and Nat have sort of different connections to the festival theater thing. She years ago went to this Minneapolis horror festival that she loved, and she always talks about what a wonderful thing it was with all this like horror theater. And I, for quite a few years, produced an outdoor sort of performance festival that was like this camping theater festival called Dark Crop. So both of us are big fans of the sort of festival atmosphere and the bringing together of a lot of different artists coming from different places. So right now, it was our first pilot year with it. So we only did 1 week of it near the end of January. And we had sort of 2 rotating nights of 3 short plays and 1 musical act. So it's sort of a night of 4 things. And then we rotated. So we had our Evening of Fear and our Night of Terror. The whole thing sold out before we opened, which was really, really nice. Because I think we put it there partially because it's kind of a dead season for theater. So we're like, either it can work for us because no one is putting on shows, and so then that's what people want to go to, or it will really not work for us because no one's putting on shows because no one wants to see a show then. But it seemed to work for us, which was great. So next year we're definitely going to do it again, We're hoping to do 2 weekends of it and maybe have a sort of, a bigger run, an extended honorarium, because we did it with an honorarium thing, not knowing if we would be able to sell this thing. So yeah, we took applications in September to October, and then we picked our shows, and it was very exciting because it's a bit of a mixed bag. You never know with submissions. You get to see parts of it, but you're reading a script. You don't know how it's going to be when it plays out. And I think that's kind of beautiful about festivals. You can have a big mix of, like, in ours, we had some really seasoned artists who had huge resumes and had been working in theater for years. And we also had really, really young people who were coming in and hadn't produced that much of their stuff yet, which is a really nice, it had a great atmosphere, I felt, even though we had some crazy weather, like the snowstorm. Our final day of it was just this, it was what they called the polar vortex day.
I recall, yes.
Yeah. So a lot of people couldn't come, but people still did. And we still had, like, more than half the house was there, and the people who were there were in it. So yeah, I'm really excited about doing it again. We're going to look at, we definitely want to try to see if we can do 2 weekends of it, but we'll look to see if we can accept more artists or what the plan is. I'm not sure exactly, but both me and Nat and Eric and Emma were really, really happy with how it went. And we're good friends with Eldritch, so it's really nice to keep doing stuff together.
I think, there is a hunger, I think, for genre theater in this city. I think recently, it was Glenn Sume was complaining about the lack of genre on our stages. You've got Spindle, you've got Eldritch, and not so many other people are doing horror. It's not something but there's obviously a hunger for it. People want that experience.
And it's a good way of, like, horror, for instance, as a genre is super popular in movies. It's very popular in books. There's, like, Little Ghost Books in terms of genre being popular. Little Ghost Books is the cutest bookstore. It's all horror based.
Yeah.
There's, like, a specific romance bookstore that exists, and it's huge as well. Like, genres are things that people like in a lot of other formats, like movies and books. So, if we want to bring in people to watch theater who are not theater people, that is a way in, which we had sort of thought of we were hoping that for the horror festival. And it did kind of come true that people who are looking for horror will then come in, even though there are people who would not choose to see theater. They'll choose to see it because it's horror, which is something that they love.
Yeah, it's a genre that draws them in. They're already predisposed to seek out that in movies. And so seeing it in the theater is something interesting and new for them. And probably in its own way, because theater is theater, more visceral.
Yeah. And it's very different. Like, again, like the pieces that we had in Dead of Winter were very different from each other. Some lean towards more in the horror comedy thing. Also, the ability to, like, using practical effects for things like horror often uses effects in film, and you can't do exactly the same things in theater that you can do in film, but you can do different things. And sometimes it's just a feeling of horror or dread. Other times it is, how can we use practical effects? Like, we had the one show that, they had their one thing and they've got but they've got their fake wall and they're going to punch through it at the end. And how can we, in a low budget, right in front of you way, still have these moments that are in horror and put them on stage? Because I think it can just be done in such different ways. Even like Spindle Collective and Eldritch, we're good friends. We do not do remotely the same thing. We both appreciate and love each other, but they're very, very different versions of what horror is.
Yeah. They're very different styles. Eldritch has the Eric Wolf aesthetic, which is a little bit more Cthulhu and puppety.
Yes.
And I picture Spindle Collective as the dark woods at night kind of horror, a little bit of Blair Witch, but a little bit, less shaky cam. One of the things, you mentioned the visceral nature of the theater and how in horror you could, like, just the slightest effects can be so effective. I remember doing a production of Macbeth a number of years ago, where in the Macduff family scene, we had like there was a baby. It wasn't a baby. It was just wrapped, but it had just a little bit of balsa wood in it. And so the murderers gave a little snap and the entire audience just
Yeah.
in a way that you don't in a film, right? In a way that you don't in a
Yes.
movie, because the sound is right there. And to watch an entire audience just like viscerally shudder and react to recoil, you
Yeah.
can't get that in any
No.
other genre of
No. And like, yeah, the simple practical effects that someone can pull off that like we had, Jeff Dingle's play. It was very funny, but it had this moment where he like ate a rat and it was just, you could see the sort of like, it's definitely made out of like plasticine or something like that, but it like stretched and you could see the gore of it. And it was perfect. Even though it was a simple effect, it was, you could feel everyone there being like, what is that?
Yeah.
Why is this suddenly very real thing in front of me? So it's exciting to see. And I think that's the exciting part about the Dead of Winter Festival, because I'm obviously interested in horror, but the things that I think of are not going to be the same things that Eric thinks of or Jeff thinks of or anyone else who is going in.
Yeah.
Because there's just, it's a genre, but it's a huge genre with so many different things that it can be.
It's a large sandbox. And I like the idea of, you could, there's something about the fact that, this rat is plasticine, it's plastic, it's not a real rat. But the magic of theater is that we've said it's a rat. And so the entire audience believes in the moment, they suspend their disbelief, it's a rat. And then it becomes something horrific, even though it's obviously not a real rat. It's just this thing that theater does.
Yeah.
What did you learn from the festival last year that surprised you?
I guess it didn't surprise me in some ways, but it did in others. That, like, with the polar vortex that happened, the desire for people to do theater. And I think Eric called it, where we were like, okay, we're not going to cancel this show. Like, we were debating whether we should cancel it or not. But then lots of people are already in the city. They're not driving anyways. And it was kind of like, okay, let's leave it up to our performers. If one person like from a show can't come in or doesn't feel safe coming in, Eric was like, I'll just do magic tricks. Like, and everyone came in. And like Susan, our one act, like we flipped the order one because she was trying to get there and the streetcar wasn't coming. And we're waiting at the door and she's just covered in snow. But she's there because that's how much people want to do it. And obviously it is, because it makes sense, because always people are doing it for like next to no money. So that's like, you want that not to be true, but like so much of indie theater, even if you get happy when you get paid, but if you try to break it down to being like, what was my hourly rate with all the producing and all the other things, it's crazy. It's not. So the reason we do it isn't going to be for that. So watching everyone, both the theater patrons and the performers, just be like, yeah, 100%, I'm going to be there. And the patrons who didn't come, it was like, literally people, like someone was texting me being like, I can't get my car. I'm trying to dig it out. I can't get it out. And still people came and people had fun. And once they were there, it was like they were more in it, because it seemed like this crazy event we were all doing together, which is kind of the festival atmosphere.
Yeah.
And what makes it nice not in comparison, but like a play on its own of like this, I don't know, the separation of being like, this is the company and the performers putting it on and here's the audience, where in the festival thing, it was like the dress rehearsal, everyone was watching each other, getting to see each other's pieces for the first time. And the musicians that came in, not necessarily from the theater world. So having the musicians be watching the shows and sing with the actors, watching the musicians do it. So it just had a really nice feel of camaraderie.
Yeah. You're mentioning about indie theater, if it was about the money, we definitely wouldn't do this. But also the thing about indie theater is that it gives us the opportunity to do things that we're not able to do on other stages.
Absolutely.
There's like we said, nobody else is doing genre except in indie theater right now. So this is how the rest of the theaters learn that it's a viable form.
Yeah. And hopefully, include us in on it. Don't just take
100%.
it.
100%. Absolutely.
But yeah, it's an interesting, yeah, give or take of things. Cause I feel like always, me and Nat we would want our things to be, picked up or have things that would progress us in a way that we could make more money from things. But you have those little fears of things of being like, oh, well, if someone else was to produce my play though, they might change things. They might do it in a way that I I don't want as much, or there are things that like having control, although you might not get the money that you'd want, there's something nice about being like, here's our show completely. We can run it in a way that feels good and healthy for the performers who are in it, and also, yeah, leaves out some of the stuff that we maybe don't care for in bigger theaters. So it's nice. We had a reading last week with the cast for Siofra, and it had a really lovely just feeling of togetherness and people on the same page. We did a photo shoot. We walked on the belt line. It was so cold. Now it's like 31 degrees, but it was so cold. We were like, oh, we're gonna get these people, lay them on the ground and put leaves on them, and it was like freezing. But yeah, it's just sort of there are downsides to not having money. But there are upsides to having that sense of control and sense of creative, like you get to own what you make and make it what you want it to be.
I do think that I do hope, as you do, that if the other theaters delve into horror, that they do take the indie theaters along who have built it, because, they kind of know what they're doing. Don't leave them behind. It would be a tragedy for that to happen.
Yeah, it was nice. Just Eric, like an Eldritch, just recently the Toronto Theatre Critics Awards, and they got recognized a little bit, which was really nice because I think it so often doesn't. Like, people won't even necessarily come see the Eldritch shows, and he's always doing the coolest things, and people don't always know about it. So it was really nice. Mel McNeil got an award for costume design, but then that like special citation of noticing that Eldritch has been doing really, really interesting, cool stuff.
For sure. I know that there have been reviewers in the past that are uninterested in the Eldritch offerings, which is a tragedy because they're missing out on some really exciting stuff. And along with that, the readers or the people who read their reviews and other articles are also missing out on it, which is terrible.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, because you are the director of a Dora Award-winning production of Riot King Suddenly last summer. We spoke about that show.
Me, you, and Lindsay.
Yeah. Did being part of a show nominated for a Dora, winning a Dora, does that affect or change the way that you see theater in Toronto in any way?
I think, I don't know, it's difficult because it's obviously everyone likes to be appreciated and noticed and have things like, oh, I've been working on stuff for so long, even if it means nothing in some ways, of being like, you're not doing it for that. It's a good feeling to go, okay, hey, someone saw this. And I know when we were there, and it was so exciting that Lindsay was nominated. I thought she absolutely deserved to be. It was a crazy, crazy performance. But then when we were there, we're like absolutely on the outliers, not thinking that she's going to win, really. And then it was all very, very exciting. And it was nice to have her appreciated and just nice to be a part of that. I think things get left out in the Doras a lot, and it kind of can be a weird world where you don't want to put too much stock in it, but you can benefit, like it matters because you can benefit, right? The whole idea that Lindsay's going to be more likely to be seen at auditions because she has that on her resume, or vice versa. People will, or like for the production itself, you'll have people maybe more inclined, or reviewers more inclined to go see it if you can say, look, hey, this is all this stuff that we got. So I feel like I'm torn with awards in general. I think obviously they're inevitably like, it's biased. That is the point. Theater generally, you like certain things, other people don't like certain things. You're never going to get, we're all on the same page, and a different thing of Doragers each year will pick wildly different things because they have different opinions. So I wouldn't, yeah, I feel like I'm torn where I always want to be appreciated because it's just nice. And I love a party. So going to the doors was fun. But do think things get left behind, and probably some more niche genre stuff is more likely to, because it's just not everyone's cup of tea. So you might have some people who really love it and then other people who really, really don't like it. So which has been, historically true in films and the Oscars. Like this year was crazy for having horror nominated in a way that it just was never nominated for like anything. So it was just Silence of the Lambs, which is on the edge. They were really calling it a thriller. Like so I think as soon as you get into the genre stuff, it's less likely in some ways to win awards, and you get that in literature as well. The amount of genre fiction that's sort of looked down upon and not going to be in the running for literary awards, to the point that lots of books will try to, even though they might fit a genre like sci-fi or romance or horror, will want themselves not marketed as such because it's going to sort of take them out from being literature, I guess, which is crazy.
That is crazy. True. It is the weird thing about
it is a thing that happens.
It's a thing that happens specifically in Canada because most of the funding comes from particular grants that the publishers get, and they are looking to fund literature, which leaves the genre stuff, which might be the stuff that people actually want to read, out in the cold.
Yeah.
And the Doras are a weird time because, a show that's winning an award, the awards are in the summer, and it might have been in January or February, and it can be a little bit of a,
like, our timing for this is like technically we'll be part of next year's, but we're happening before the Doras this year because we're in June.
But you're after the deadline for the Doras this year. Yeah.
Which
wild.
Last summer I thought they would forget anyways because it was in August. It was so far before, but people didn't forget about Lindsay, which was nice. But it was way far before the Doras because it was in August of the previous year.
Yeah, for sure. I want to delve a little bit more into you and your theater origin story. It's one of my favorite things is just talking about why people chose to do this. And you mentioned, going to university or going to theater school, and you were there, I think, at the same time as Natalia Bushnik. But what was your first draw into theater?
Well, my family's very musical and generally kind of artsy and would push towards those sorts of things anyways. So I started performing musically and singing very young with my family. And then I think I started like most people. I would have done little bits of theater stuff in school, and then pretty early on did like theater programs, extracurricular stuff outside. So I feel like those kinds of things, it was a whole different world for me of how much I wanted to go to them, because I was in all kinds of, you're in different lessons. I had soccer in the summer, and I had piano lessons, and I did Irish dancing for a while. All of these things were things I was sort of interested in. And then when I started doing theater, and I remember this very clearly, the first one that I got so into was, I grew up in Cambridge, and there was this little theater called Galt Little Theater, and it did a children's drama program like Saturday mornings. I hate mornings, and it's my day off, and I was so excited. And it was an amazing little program. The woman who ran it like wrote little scripts. They were all original little stories, and we would like put them on, and we'd have, so each thing you'd come in, and just being in these 5 to 10 minute plays, I cared so much. And it was so above like other things. I would be like, I'm kind of sick, I don't want to go to this thing. I would have like a stomach flu and be like, I'm fine, I can go, I'm gonna be fine. So I think it pretty early on was just the thing I wanted to do the most out of everything. And then join like community theater stuff, again, mostly in musicals, which I love musicals. And I try to incorporate music in all kinds of things in our shows, even if they're not really technically musicals. But yeah, I did a lot of community theater and then youth theater. I think I was pretty lucky that in my area there was a lot of Kitchener-Waterloo region. There was just a lot of youth theater going on. And so throughout my high school thing, I was like, I'd be in like 3 or 4 plays every night. I would be going to a different rehearsal of some Shakespeare ones we were doing and musicals and community theater ones. So it kind of stemmed there. And then I went to school in Windsor for acting, met Nat there. And it's never, I always have like 10 million jobs, but I always am doing theater. And I sort of have been since I was quite young. And I feel like whenever I'm not, I get pretty sad. So I got to keep doing it.
I mean, that is absolutely a fact. You've mentioned, like you mentioned, always having so many jobs. You've described yourself as somebody who has about 8 jobs at any given time. How when balancing all of those things, how do you find the balance to make sure that you still manage to get your theater time?
Yeah, I would say usually I get my theater time at the expense of things like sleep and and like being okay and just having some days off. I to my detriment, I feel like I fit it in. And I also think because it's fun and exciting, it gives purpose in ways that like I was talking about this the other night of like if I'm kind of down, I would like go to a bar and then like write. And then it'll make me feel like I have it gives me this purpose in a way that I kind of need and rely on. So the money thing is tough. So just trying to figure out how you can balance the not being crazy stressed about money, having some time off, seeing friends and my family's very intense, so they take up a lot of time. Um, no, luckily with the theater thing, a great thing about making theater with your friends is that you get some time with your friends. Like me and Nat, if we are working on a show, we're doing a read through, and then after the read through, we'll get drinks and we'll chat about all the other stuff in our lives as well. So oftentimes you get to have this sort of social aspect along with the theater thing, and that does help because then you're doing both.
Do you find, you mentioned living in Hamilton, do you
Yeah.
find the distance between the Hamilton and the Toronto scene difficult to cross?
Sometimes I've been worse that in the sense that I've been sometimes I'm in like constantly in transit is what I feel like. If I have like, and I'm sure I will feel like that for Siofra, if I'm going there constantly all the time. Now, also I like the GO train and I get lots done because I've got all my different little jobs and I'm like, okay, well, I'll get these hours done here and this thing. So I usually get stuff done on transit. I'm also very transit savvy. I had to take like 3 buses to get to high school. I'm very used to taking a lot of transit. So for a lot of people, it's more of a hassle. Where for me, I'm like, oh, and then I cycle here and I do all like, it's kind of just always been a part of what I do. And then I really like the Hamilton scene here. I work at the Fringe Festival, which is lovely, with Chris and Franny there. And I think it's a nice pace that I moved here a little over 2 years ago. I also live in a house, which is nice versus an apartment.
That does help take a little bit of
So
the
I
edge
have a
off.
backyard.
Yeah.
It's lovely. So I think sometimes when I have really intense stuff going on in Toronto a lot, so around Christmas, I was like, I do murder mystery dinner theater as one of my jobs. And so I was going in and out for it. And that was a bit draining. So it's just trying to be aware so that I am not crazy overbooking myself in Toronto. I also just always try to tie it in. If I'm coming in for something like a rehearsal, I go, oh, well, this might be a good time to go see a friend after while I'm there. So I rely on my planner a lot.
Absolutely. I just want to say the Hamilton Fringe is one of the warmest fringes in Canada. I premiered one of my shows there. I put it up there with the warmth of Montreal. I don't know if you've ever been to the Montreal Fringe.
I've never been to Montreal.
It's a very warm and welcoming festival, and that often comes from leadership. And Hamilton is much the same. It's a very warm fringe. So I'm a fan of that festival.
That's where we premiered Samka in 2022, was at that Fringe Festival.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a really, it's crazy, as all fringes are, but I'm front of house manager, and it's lovely. Everyone who's a part of it is so lovely.
Yeah. I want to ask about whether you think that horror theater has a particular capacity for feminist storytelling that other genres don't.
Ooh. I would say yes. Yeah, I think it kind of, it lends itself to it in many ways. Somewhat, I think horror always has that sense of like the other in things. So people who don't quite feel like they fit in are very at home in the horror genre. I think women like tend to love horror and things like true crime that are dominated by women. I think with this strange sense of like, you have fear, but then you have control over it a little bit by being a part of it. And they also, even in the things that maybe wouldn't be called feminist horror films, it's still, women are often the main characters, which doesn't exist in other genres as much. Much more often they would be secondary ones historically in films. So I think the fact that horror historically often has women, a final girl, whatever, the main character being a woman makes it that you're more likely to be drawn to it in the way that you feel like you're more a part of the story, or the story is more about you. And then in terms of folklore and folktale characters, monsters and things like that, I think there just are more female monsters and these characters that are like witches, and a lot of them are, it is just dominated by the presence of women. So whatever, and this is my belief about things that are feminist anyways, whatever story they're trying to tell, the most feminist thing is for women to be there. Like it's the stories that bug me are ones that it's like they're not really a part of it, or they're just a little thing on the side, where I love amoral women. I don't need my stories to have a moral or a point really, but the existence of female characters in the stories inherently makes it feminist because they're there. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And there's different ones in it.
Yeah. I mean, also, you mentioned like a lot of the folklore has, women who are the monster, the antagonist, the witch. And yet those are roles that those are names that are put upon someone who's mostly misunderstood. Right. I mean, if you look through the women who've been called witches in the past, many of them were just misunderstood, or a woman who lived alone in the woods, or all, like there's so many different things that they were that had the moniker of witch thrown on them. And I think that's the same with monster. And so you're right, by having them there, it becomes a feminist story, especially if you can delve into who they are.
Yeah. And good or bad or both, most likely. But yes, just their existence and is kind of what makes it feminist, I feel like. Just that's what the story is.
Yeah. Now, getting back to Siofra for a second, you mentioned you had a reading recently. The show is, it's a different, it's part of this cycle, so it's not a sequel, and it's part of the spiritual trilogy of the plays, the Dark Mother cycle.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you have discovered recently in the play that has surprised you?
I think in this reading, especially, was the humor coming out. So we often made jokes with Samka because it was so not funny. Like, to the point, like, Nat always wants to be funny, and she kept trying to be like, maybe I can read this line in a way that will be funny. And there's nothing funny about Samka. And we thought when we wrote Siofra, because Siofra is it's the most grounded in reality, I would say, of the three plays. It has more set in the real world with the fear of the folklore, the more magical world, but it's very much set in a real time and place, in the way that the other two are a little bit less. And somewhat as a result, and somewhat because of the cast members who are all great and I feel like really well suited to their parts, and they were getting a great rapport, there's just a lot more moments for humor that came out, which was really, really nice to see, because it's a heavy story. It's a very heavy story if you say what the plot is fully, which I won't say. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it's a very heavy story. So it was really lovely to hear the sort of these very human moments that made it quite funny, because it's people in a town reacting to some crazy things that are happening. So I was very pleasantly surprised by how funny it was. Now, I will not say it as a comedy, because that would be incorrect and it should not be marketed as a comedy. But if someone saw Samka, it's funnier than Samka. That's all I can say.
I mean, it's interesting because I think that things do need humor, right? You need the opposite
Who's the
side
moment?
of what it is. A comedy needs
Yeah.
a little bit of seriousness at the end.
Yeah.
Something that's serious needs some comedy in it
Yeah.
to both disarm and give people a break. So they're definitely necessary parts.
Yeah. And horror and comedy go very, very well together. Obviously, Eldritch is full of that. And this one will have more comedy, which is nice. Like Samka, I think, would have like, historically, maybe had 3 spots where people would laugh. And we were like, yeah, we got our one joke in before it gets so heavy that they can't do this. And this one's going to get heavy, but yeah, and I'm looking forward to see how audiences will react and finding the humor in it with our actors.
Sounds like a great show. I'm really looking forward to it. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you giving me some time.
Yeah, this was lovely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Stageworthy. Before I tell you who my guest is next week, let me tell you about my Patreon, because I cannot do this show without the people who are backing me on Patreon. It costs money to make a show like this. All of the things cost money. A website, a place to host all the audio files so they can be distributed to all of the podcast listening places. Editing software, transcripts cost money. Everything about creating a podcast costs money on some level. And I can't do it without the people who are backing me on Patreon. I'm eternally grateful to them. And if you would like to join them, if you would like to help me to make Stageworthy, you could do that by going to patreon.com/Stageworthy and becoming a patron. Patrons get early access to episodes. We have some conversations about things that are happening in the theater community and the theater world at large. And the more people that join, the more I will be able to offer my patrons. I'll be able to add new things for patrons if I get more of them. So if you want to help me to make the show, please go to patreon.com/Stageworthy and become a patron. My guest next week is Victoria Sullivan. Victoria is a Hamilton-based theater creator and is part of my extra series of interviews where I interview people who are bringing shows to the Toronto Fringe. And the show that Victoria is bringing is called Minimum. It's a fascinating show, and so you should tune in next week to learn about Minimum at the Toronto Fringe. I'll see you next week.